This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is Paul Arney of the Ale Apothecary in Bend, Oregon. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about all sorts of fun things today, from brewing mixed culture, farmhouse, sour, wild, whatever you want to call them, beers. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the trends in that kind of industry and where those things are going these days. I think the death of that style has been greatly exaggerated, but certainly things are changing at a rapid pace. Can't wait to get into with you, Paul. But first, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize, Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Sam Adams, and more, trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, Old Orchard supplies craft juice blends from the heart of Beer City, USA. As the industry blending experts, they supply major national brands and growing breweries alike. They've been the best kept juicy secret in craft beverage for years, but now the secret's out. Breweries across the board are experiencing a seamless transition to Old Orchard as their new juice supplier. So hop aboard the Old Orchard fruit train. Their sample kit starter pack is waiting for you at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Paul, tell me a little bit about your arc in brewing and how you got to where you are today, operating the Ale Apothecary, a very small, very niche, mildly esoteric, creative brewing institution out there in the woods in Bend, Oregon, and then, of course, now with the tap room as well. Talk to me a little bit about how you got to that place in brewing right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I got my initial start in brewing with my father. I was 18 years old and looking for something to buy him for Christmas, and ended up buying him a homebrew kit. And so we made a couple batches of bitter. It was one of these things that it's as I was getting to that particular age, leaving high school, getting into college, and it was great to find something that Dad and I could do together. You know what I mean? Sure. It's like I got a 14-year-old now, and we're starting to get into that. It's like, what do you do? How do you find these common grounds? And beer worked. It worked for us. So we brewed a few batches, and I went away to college. Followed my heart, and ended up with a geology degree with no actual plans on how to use it. And when I got out of college and found out that there were mining jobs and USGS jobs, desk jobs, those things weren't so appealing. So I took
welcome to resource extraction. Hello,
exactly, and it was really I entered on this path, and let's just say that the school that I went to didn't do the best job of guiding me into a career. But, I like rocks and I like the outdoors, so it worked. I drawn this from time to time. But I ended up working in a coffee shop I guess I was South Everett back when Starbucks was still cool. And there was this one customer that would come in a fair amount, and I got to know him pretty good. And he was running the Glacier Peak Brew House in Everett, Washington. His name was Tom Munoz, and he invited me to shadow him a little bit, which I did. And at the same time, a graduate from my high school, Jeff Matheson, was working at the Red Hook plant, and then he transitioned into Maritime Pacific, I believe. And so I shadowed these guys, and it was fascinating and interesting, because I'd worked with my father home brewing, and basically when I came away from that, it's just like I could do this. This seems like a better job than slinging coffee. And so I put myself through the UC Davis Master Brewers program, sold my van and went to school and got my foot in the door. And in a way that, looking back on it, it's like I probably should have just got a job cleaning kegs or something. But I was able, at 24 years old, I was able to land a brewing job down at Deschutes Brewery down in Bend, Oregon. It was great. Wife and I got married 2 weeks before the move, and so it was a big transition, right?
Sure.
Marriage and a career job. And so we moved down there, and I worked my way up in the chain. And by 2011, I was assistant master brewer and had quite a bit of brewing experience under my belt. Lots of we had 3 different brew houses and all sorts of stuff. But the challenge for me was as how far away that I had moved from the actual art of brewing, right?
Sure.
So I quit.
It's a bold move. Walking away from a nice career at a stable company with good salary and nice benefits, and then going to launch your own thing in 2011.
Yeah. When you put it like that, it sounds really stupid.
Well,
I mean, I think there's
you're
a
not
number
the
of
only
people.
one that had that same drive that is doing it today. But right, there's. Talk to me a little bit about that vision. Like, what was it at that point that said, "Hey, this needs to exist in the world, and I need to be the one to make it"?
Yeah, I think what it came down to initially was a frustration. I remember when I left that coffee shop. One of the women that I worked with, she was older than me and had a family. I respected her a lot. When I told her that I was going away to become a brewer, the word that she described was noble. How noble? I still remember that. It was like, and it struck me because I was in my early 20s. It's like, noble. That's a kind of a serious word, and that's not how I thought about beer, and as my education in understanding beer and the culture and the history as it pertains to us humans, it is noble. Like the brewing arts are pretty significant for us humans. And so when I found myself, let me say before that, applying myself at a company like Deschutes that had enough money to supply these whims of discovery and have the funds to say, sure, you want to go make this beer with these strawberries in these barrels, or you need a piece of equipment. What is it that we need to do? And fund those kind of things. It was great. When I found my track, or let's say the career track, how it pulls, and this happens in lots of industries, right? Any craft, if you keep moving upwards in a successful business, all roads end in management.
Yes, they do. Sure.
And at the time,
I've been there myself. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And so
I looked at a lot of spreadsheets at one point in my career. So.
Right, and they're important, and especially where I'm at now.
Solved a lot of interpersonal issues between people working for me. I get you.
But at the particular time that I was not ready to accept that as my fate, and so. I didn't have any vision. There wasn't something else. I had a 401k, and I gave a healthy amount of notice to the brewery because they taught me, and I wanted to give back.
Sure.
But no, and so between, let's say it was I think it was probably the first bit of 2011 in January when I gave my notice, and I left there officially in May. In that 5-month window is when I, kind of distilled down what's important to me. What, if this is going to be my career, what are the things about beer that speak to me as a human, as a person?
Right.
And how can I celebrate those things that I wasn't finding myself in the position to do in another realm, say. And so it really came down to, the bare bones, the bottom line with historical beer is, brewers that knew how to make this stuff would source their ingredients locally. They would put them together with their creative brain, using the water and the yeast that were available. It's like that's why I don't source anything through a catalog.
Yeah.
It's like. It's very important to me to try to make things as natural as possible. And that was it. It's like, we have a unique location. So let's take that location and use the ingredients that are from around there and put it together in our own unique way and see if that we can contribute to this greater thing that we call beer.
And so you focus on some pretty specific styles with the Apothecary. Generally sour beer styles. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is it's a pretty tight niche, for the brewing that you kind of pursue here. What drove that kind of inspiration?
Yeah, and honestly, I would say that style has never been something that I've been in pursuit of. It's making this completely natural product, has been the drive, right? And because we don't use chemical sanitizers, because we're using wood for our vessels, and we're trying to make mixed culture beers with the microflora that's available, we're just doing the best that we can with certain boundaries, shall we say, right? And so with that, especially initially, it was all long-term barrel-aged beers that we call sours, right? And in this industry, I realize that we've come to this place where that is the going category, where we call these things sours, but it's always been a struggle because one of my favorite experiences is when you get people who say, "Oh, beer's not my thing," or I don't like sours, and then they have our beer and they're like, "Oh, that's actually quite good," And sour as a word, especially for people who aren't familiar, typically means, if like milk goes sour. These are not
negative connotations.
Yeah. And that's something I'm learning to live with this branding, right?
What would you call it then?
Well, and
I agree with you. I think, I try not to just talk about things as sour. I try to talk about the acid component in these beers. Acid is a component, in all sorts of food and all cooking, everything that we do, all beverages, it's not that, and there are huge amounts of acids in other kinds of beverages. It's just they have a lot of other things in them too. So you don't taste the acid to the same degree. With your kind of beer, how do you, in your mind, in this ideal world,
and that's what it is, right?
How would you describe it? What do you call them?
Well,
or is that even that need to create a hierarchy and taxonomy for these things unnecessary? I mean, I know we're humans, especially from this Western mind, we have this bent towards taxonomy. We have to put things into buckets. We have to find ways to, figure out that this is like this and this is like this and this is, we have words that describe these things, because that does seem to be this kind of like foundation of human knowledge in general that we have, like being able to draw these comparisons between things. Not that those taxonomies are always beneficial. They often are reductive and incomplete and not descriptive of what those things are. But for you, is there a term? Is there a way that you think about these beers that's beyond that or something different?
I mean, there is definitely a way I think about them, but I have found through the years that we've been in business that it's much easier just to fall into this, you can only, I find myself like it can only be anti so much, right? We can't be anti everything. So lately, I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, I've kind of swallowed that pill, and we do refer to our beers as sours.
Okay. You're picking your battles.
You do, and it is one of those things. But when we have people like yourself and like your audience that can appreciate this conversation and we can bring it up and talk about it, it's like, I will. But it's like, I guess the elevator speech that has been distilled down to, what I tell people is locally sourced, barrel aged natural beer. Those are kind of the as a result, of because the beer is natural and we're using this wild fermentation microflora that's not just a single yeast, we end up with sour beer. And if we get to that point and we can start talking about it, that's fine. But it's like if somebody's, actually like on the lifts today, out here skiing around, it's like when somebody asks me about my brewery, I tell them that we get our ingredients from local farms. We make as natural product as we can, and we age it in barrels.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. And let's talk, because as much as we'd like to think that things are purely natural. There is some process and some guidance in the hand of the artist and craftsman.
Yeah, and the definition of natural is like, and I realize that, right? Everybody has their own definition, and so
right. There's definitely some intention and some guidance and some pushing and direction on this. Let's dig into that a little bit more. But first, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, did you know that breweries that serve food have seen an increase in revenue of 1.8x? Second Kitchen is a food tech startup that connects local breweries to iconic neighborhood restaurants to help provide your brewery with food experiences that keep customers in your taproom longer. Second Kitchen provides the technology, support, custom menus, and more, all at no cost to your brewery. So you start this brewery to make this kind of beer, and the style of beer that you end up making is driven by this desire to make as natural a product as you can and to kind of move past some of this more industrialized production. Not that in itself is bad. It's just
totally.
It is the way that large volume commercial craft brewers do brew. Mm-hmm. You decide.
I drink a lot of that. It's not it, and that is. Do too. I think that's. Yeah. And I will say, as a way to make a point, it's. I think what I'm trying to do is more of a. It's almost like an art installation, right? It's not. I realize completely these are not the daily drinkers for most people, but what I'm trying to do is celebrate this career and this craft that I love, right? And as we're transitioning into this future where technology is becoming more and more important, for me, I believe wholeheartedly that to make some of the best beer, not saying it has, I'm not referring directly to mine, but just without the technology, you can make world-class beer. And I think that is something that is, to me, is extremely important. In these other industries, especially like wine, when people are talking about it's all about the grape, and we farm. Basically, they're growing the grapes for the wine, and the real winemaking happens in the farming. Well, with beer, it happens in the process. And the brewer is part of that process, and that really is essential to my vision of what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to celebrate the brewer, we're trying to celebrate all that's possible, and kind of just make sure that we hold on to some of this history as we move forward into the future.
Talk to me a little bit about, you're talking about this kind of move away from technology. Talk to me a little bit about your brew house and how you've set that up in order to keep that brewer closer to the beer that you're making itself.
Yeah. So it's everything. It's very manual, right? Obviously, our location is we're about we're like 4,700 feet. About 1,500 feet higher than Bend, Oregon, but we're 10 miles west of there. And we've got this. Our property's up in the forest. And so, when let's just say the first, it's really hard to say how many of these batches of beer was a struggle, but I can remember the very first brew day I had in this brew house, right? I'd spent all this money that I had, my retirement, and my dad gave me a bit of a loan. And so I'd spent all this, and I designed this brewery and had focused, as much as I could on how do I make good beer without all that equipment, right? And so, using barrels and wood products, I've never been a fabricator. I'm not a welder. I'm not really that good of a carpenter, but I'm a better carpenter than I'm a welder, right? And here, wood was this thing that I was really wanting to use. I wanted the brew house and our brewery to have as little stainless as possible. So I really started with a bunch of these loose ideas, right? Like what makes me feel good, right? And I don't know if I can swear, but
we're all 21 here.
Okay, that's great. Right? I mean, it was like to do something like this. When I decided that I was going to spend my retirement, I wasn't going to give. Right. I was throwing everything at this, and I really just was like, if this this has to work. If it doesn't work the way that I want, well, fuck it. It's not going to. And, I placed a lot of, governors in, like in the process and I guess at the business to kind of keep me honest, because before I moved into the realm, this was my first business. I had no experience, and it was still easy for me to carry on this proletariat attitude, right? It's just like, this has to work. And if it doesn't, fuck it. And so I started with this idea. I'm going to use oak barrels as much as possible. I'm going to eliminate stainless as much as I can. And these aren't things that I was saying, had any value as far as like process. They were just visions, right? It's like, because I had to start somewhere. I wasn't starting with a business plan. And now looking back on it, there's so many things I probably would have done differently, but thank God I didn't, because I wouldn't have this very unique little thing going on right now. And so, it was oak barrels. I found a guy up in Olympia who had been making copper stills, and I had him make my brew kettle. And, I knew all the, working in the industrial environment, there's certain things brewers talk about every day, right? I mean, it's like beyond the production of like trying to, shift brewing and trying to make all these beers hit targets. Each one of them, you're trying to, there's some very basic things, right? I mean, if we're going to be harvesting our yeast on the second and third day of fermentation, I want a clean wort. I don't want it to be getting diluted down with this trub, right? And so for us, we grind in and mash in the evening. We will, the next following day, we'll run off to a brew kettle and boil and all that. And then we'll run that wort, the boiled wort, through a heat exchanger into a large barrel, which we call our settling barrel, and allow the hot and the cold break to settle out. So it takes us like 40 hours to go from grinding grain to pitching our yeast, and that's basically because I wanted to make sure that we're making the best brew we can, and if we're harvesting our yeast, that we're removing as much of the trub as possible. And these were all things that I was gathering from my previous, industrial job. Sure. But what came out of it, and I think this is where I find the most joy, because I didn't set a destination. I went in with this idea, like, if I can get the ball rolling, I'm going to trust Mother Nature on certain things. We're going to move through the process, and the beer is going to be what it is. And I'm going to trust that it's going to be good because I have a base knowledge. And if I set this thing up and start rolling down the hill, snowball's going to get bigger. It's going to eventually be something worthwhile and unique to us, right? It's going to have that house character that we can claim as ours. And I guess one example is this overnight mashing thing, is at the time, since it was just me, we had very small children. I think it was like 1 and 3 years old. And I'd read about these Scandinavian brewers that some of them would, wrap their mash tuns in blankets and mash overnight. And for me, it was a practical decision. Oh, here we go. We put the kids to bed. I'll go out and do my little mash thing. And the next morning I'll be that much further ahead. It's just works better for our family environment at the time. But as time has gone by, and talking to other brewers and experiencing the mouthfeel of our beer, I think we're getting tannin extraction that is developing into this mouthfeel that we really couldn't get any other way. Huh. And those are the things that just make me glow, because it's like, I definitely do not pretend to know everything or even a moderate amount about this beer making, right? I mean, I've had a lot of experience in it, but every brewery you go into, every brewery is different. And most of the times when you get your tour and you see something unique and you say, hey, well, how'd you end up doing this? Well, it all leads to that point from trial and error. Well, this is where we were at, and somebody tried this thing and something happened. And so we have now implemented that into our process, and that house character can't be built any other way. And so I'm through these years, I'm a firm believer that house character is in the process is equal to the raw materials, right? So like we source really high quality raw materials. They're local, and I know the farmers. But I also believe that our process...
This even includes malted grain?
Malted grain, yeah. We got the Klon family up in Madras is started their project about the same time we did, which was very fortunate, right? Because I was looking to keep everything Oregon. And so, have these guys up the road growing and malting grain was wonderful. But just to kind of finish that thought is... this idea that process and house character and its impact on the beer, to me, it's equal in the impact to the raw material selection, right? Because of the at least for some of the beers that we're making, maybe it wouldn't be so apparent in a heavily hopped beer, but where we're going for these subtle nuances. The fact that we have this really goofy process, it's about as important as it could be.
No, I think, in this kind of sour mixed culture beer world, that kind of house character piece is often associated directly with the culture, which is really that kind of, fermentation process, and not necessarily focused on what you're talking about, which is all the other pieces of this brewing process. Everything from, and you use it's a wood-fired kettle, is it not?
No, it's not. Okay. I considered that, but I mean, there's got to be reality and limits. I mean, I actually considered
concessions to modernity there.
I mean, I considered making my own caustic soda with the ash that would have been left over from this wood-fired kettle, and it's like, just wait a minute, hold on, what are we doing? We're making beer here, we're not, and then that's another thing too. It's like a lot of these breweries. Specialty breweries are going into, growing their own grain or malting their grain or growing fruit or having a farm and doing all these other things beyond the scope of beer brewing, which I admire. I just, for us, I feel fortunate that we can source these materials nearby from farms and can focus specifically on this odd way that we make beer.
Yeah. So walk me through it. Now you're mashing overnight, you're running through your boil process. Talk to me a little bit about fermentation, and talk to me then a little bit also, as I alluded to earlier, about how you built a culture and built this thing to ferment your beer with this local and natural kind of approach.
Sure. Yeah. So we're mashing in a puncheon. So we're mashing an oak, which is a nice microflora. It harbors a bunch of bacteria, but the temperature is high enough where we don't get a sour mash. But I think we get deeper color saturation. We get this tannin extraction. We get a little better extraction because it's we're as rustic as we are. It's like we'll take everything, Yeah. And but we are about an 83% brew house efficiency. So there's that's something else. So we'll run off to our boil kettle, boil. We typically will just do like our boiling hops, for 60 or 90 minutes. We're not a big hop forward brewery. We typically just use Cascades from Goshi Farms. And
aged, not aged?
Both. I mean, it's like some beers get aged hops, some beers get a combination of last year's crop and aged hops. But yeah, we have like our little library of hops and aging those things out. Some of our beers get dry hopped. But yeah, so after boiling, we'll run it into this the settling barrel like I was telling you about. And the following day, we've got 4 different fermenters. One's Oregon Barrel Works 8-barrel, 10-barrel wood vat. So we can do 2 brews into that. We have a 4-barrel Doug Fir fermenter that we got from Hall Woodford that's back east. And then we have a couple puncheons with the heads removed for like our higher gravity 3-barrel batches. And so we'll empty the fermenter into barrels and do a little we call it a hot cycle. We just circulate almost boiling water through it after scrubbing it clean. And then we'll push our clarified wort from sitting overnight into the fermenter and pitch our house culture into it. And so our house culture is, we've got these 2 strains of wild Saccharomyces. And so the way that we put these organisms to work is we have a puncheon in the brewery with a heating element in it. And we keep our sourwort culture going in there, our lacto culture. Very similar to the way that German breweries use their sourwort is we have a storage tank and a prop tank. The prop tank is wood with the heating element, and every batch, we'll acidify our mash so we hit our proper pH, and we'll do the same in the kettle with this sourwort that we make. And so that's kind of the lacto portion. Our primary fermentation is dominated by these 2 wild sac strains. And over the course of time, of course, they get they get other organisms in there as well. And if we start seeing a change where we've had Pediococcus go rampant in primary, which is always very interesting. We will, we have done acid washing, or we'll just get those 2 strains brought in from Imperial again. But after learning a little bit more about Kvike and how Norwegian and Scandinavian brewers manage their yeast, we've been able to do a little bit better job of maintaining our house culture without the crutches. And then, the barrel aging process after fermentation, racking it into barrels, the Brettanomyces and the Pediococcus are primary, their job is during barrel aging. So primary fermentation is our wild sac strains. We're adding this sourwort, the lacto component, and then with the barrel aging, we'll get the impact from the Brett and the Pediococcus.
How did you, idealize and select for these kinds of things? Were there specific characters that you're looking for in this, and in some flavor profile, or was there a more loose and kind of broad approach to this?
And are you talking about like the how the organisms each have their own little?
Sure, you're selecting out for specific kind of things that are going to produce specific flavors. I mean, figuring out how these things go it's the one of those big problems and challenges in this kind of wild and sour brewing. It's one thing to make a product that is just the result of whatever bugs you have. That doesn't always create a product that people want to buy, drink, and enjoy, or doesn't necessarily hit the vision of flavor that you might want to produce and put out there in the world. How do you triangulate between that idea of the flavors that you want these things to have and how the organisms that you're using achieve those kinds of flavors?
Yeah. So, I think at the time I was looking at the brewing culture, the brewing industry, and the products that were available. And typically for beers that had a sour component, the thing that went along with them was blending, right? It's like we have sour beer and it's blended. And to me, what I wanted to do was I really wanted to see what was possible. And I didn't want to involve myself at the very end of the process to determine how the beer was going to, not necessarily how it was going to taste, but I didn't want to be the final judge on what was possible. So I went into this with the idea we're going to do our best to not blend, right? And so, okay. It's very interesting, right? I mean, because, with lambic beers and the way that they're produced, and blending's necessary.
Sure.
And then, you have this word that's called spontaneous. And, while we do some spontaneous beers, the fact that we sometimes we often harvest and pitch to get a alcoholic fermentation, a primary alcoholic fermentation that's dominated by these wild sac strains, I'll lose people, right? I mean, it's like this consumer that we're trying to engage with. Not everybody wants to listen to us wax on about these kind of things. it's complicated, and
Sure.
we always don't have answers. And if you say that you're, if
I mean, no one wants to listen to a winemaker talk about their malolactic fermentation either.
my God.
Like, just
now, Zachary, do you hear that?
right?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I mean, there is a limit. I mean, there are certain consumers that do care about this kind of thing and are interested in that kind of depth and background around it. But, there are also folks that don't want to know how the sausage is made and want to enjoy a nice, well-crafted, thoughtfully considered kind of product. But having said that, like, that's a super big challenge to lay out there for yourself, to say we're going to do these as single string beers and not use these tools of blending that are at your disposal.
With all the things that can happen with wild beers. Yeah. But that's why our process looks the way that it does. Is like, I was committed to this idea of making, and I guess where I was going with this whole idea of spontaneous, like it's, I think a lot of people identify spontaneous as natural, which I appreciate, right? It's like you make this thing, you leave it out, Mother Nature lands in it, and boom, you've got something. Well, it doesn't always go the way you want it to, and so then the brewer has to come back in and kind of put it together in a certain way. And it's wonderful. I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to explore the concept of like, okay, well, what's natural to me? Like, where do I draw the line? And so, like with hot water for sanitation and being able to just scoop the yeast off the top and add that later without chemical sanitation to select for these single yeast strains. I've set it up in a way where, to me, I feel like I'm creating this natural product, but maybe we're using techniques that, after Pasteur discovered certain things, right? We're taking certain things, and we're using, we use a microscope, and
you also know the yeast exists. Which
we
is,
know that it's not the magic stick all the time,
right?
But it's kind of like it's my vision of what we can do in a natural way to facilitate brewing beer the way that we are, and I don't know. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it's really just like what I think, to go back to your earlier point about celebrating the brewer. It's like our role, the human in this is to, at least from my vision, right, from my little myopic view on what we're doing, the role of the brewer is to recognize a way to make things work, right? Okay, this organism prefers these kind of situations, and this is how we can achieve it with some very simple and rustic processes or techniques, right? Without having to get too deep into technology. We can, I was always inspired when we have this local bakery, and they've got this sourdough strain that's just phenomenal. And I've been there a few times when they get the thing going, and they've got this big crock and this big wooden stick, and they start mixing it up. And I've always loved when the two bakers are there and they're like, well, how's it, like, what's going on? Well, it feels a little more elastic than it did yesterday. Or, like that knowledge that where they're continually making this thing, right? I mean, they're turning out their sourdough every day, but that organism is alive and it's changing, and they're witnessing the things that they need to do as humans to get it going in the way that they need it to go, right? And I mean, I think that's how we're trying to work our beer. It's without hitting things super hard, I mean, we don't have glycol, right? And so like we don't force carbonate. And it's like, what are the things that we can be patient. We can be very patient, and a lot of times that's it's worth a lot. I mean, for example, on the way out here, Willamette Week up in Portland has chosen one of our beers as one of the top 10 beers of 2019, which is awesome. But the beer they chose was this beer that we had made this wheat wine. Our brewer Connor Curry had designed this wheat wine, and we had done a small beer from it, and the beer came out so tannic. Like, I mean, it was like, we extracted all those tannins, at high temperature, the pH was going up and all that stuff, right? And we got this beer that we put in barrels and we just left it there. We tasted it over the last 4 years. We've been just watching it. And this last year, we were like, hey, this is pretty good. We're going to actually bottle it. And we gave it to our ale club. Well, that's the beer that they chose. And I just like, that is, it's to me, it really makes my day, because it's like, again, kind of going back to this idea of like where we started. And then for me, if I would have judged that at the beginning, I would have dumped it, right? I would have said, this is not worth anything, as what I know as a brewer, for my palate. But, we kept it in barrels, and look what happened. It turned into something amazing. And, I don't know. I like to travel, and when you're out traveling around without an itinerary, and you're meeting people, and you get you get people telling you, oh, you should go check this out, and those are the kind of experiences that fill me as a human being, And I think that's really what I'm trying to put into this beer, that we're making.
Are there some examples of, as you are working with that beer, as you're hands-on and you're tasting the way these things are going, and you want to redirect it, or you may want to move it in a different direction, or you think it might benefit, with that baker analogy of a little more liquid to, loosen the dough a bit. Like what, talk to me a little bit about how, you, as you are working through this long process with your beer, can kind of move it in some of those directions.
Yeah. Well, lately, so I guess I feel like in a lot of ways we were reinventing the wheel, right? I mean, I feel like probably everything that we're doing has been done before by another brewer that's figured it out. You know what I mean? It's like, I just feel like a lot of times
they got you all the way to this place that you were, and then you decided to walk away from that and go all the way back to this old
and just start over. But it's been great. I've learned a lot.
But at least with the viewpoint and the understanding and that kind of context of how those things can be done. Sure.
Yeah. And, so for our, and so like we started in 2011, we're only like 9 years into this thing. And getting our yeast to, perform initially was probably a 4 to 6 month process. Because I had these, learning about how the Germans and this whole idea of sourwort helped them kind of negotiate Reinheitsgebot was fascinating, right? It's like I had been used to just dumping mineral salts into the mash and in the kettle. It's like not even really thinking about it. And granted, I'm sure there's a lot of brewers in Germany that would have rather done that than have a whole little facility to produce sourwort. But to me, that was like this way that you can drive in house character without relying on stuff that's mined out of the ground from who knows where, right? And so that was kind of like the first real like, this is beer making, but this is not in the wheelhouse of the beer making that I was really familiar with. And so having that, because I was so intrigued with that, we were adding quite a bit of it. And I wasn't really thinking, the reason I want to do that is because I want a low pH for primary fermentation to keep the yeast dominant and the bacteria less dominant. I was just like, I want this in my beer. We're making this. I want it, we're going to make beer that's tart, going to make beer that's sour. So this is going to help. Well, our primary fermentation, is in the low 4s to mid 4s. And for those first 4 to 6 months, the yeast was really, really struggling. But it ended up coming around. And so that was probably the first time it's like, okay, so, I can lean in a certain direction, and this nature is going to give a little bit, right? They'll come it'll come a certain distance. And that's kind of the play is like, we can do things a certain way. I mean, so like I was talking about too, as far as, not blending, that's not the case all the time, right? I mean, sometimes we do have to blend. And,
sure.
And so I think most recently, we have been experiencing some pretty darn low pHs that we are trying to figure out how can we keep these things. We have a sweet spot, 3.5 is a really nice space for our beers. One of our our benchmarks after we did this tasting. One of our favorite beers of all time, where we were like, we've got to, we have to find a benchmark just to know for us. The beer that we chose through this sensory thing was a mistake beer, right? The power had gone out that day. We actually ended up having to get water from the goddamn creek to finish this beer. And it had soured overnight in the brew kettle. And it was just like, it was a clusterfuck. But the beer that came out was, for what we consider who we are, what we like, and the flavor profile, that was the one. It was 3.55. It was one of our Sahalis. And so it's, I don't know. It's just, it's this constant push and pull, right? Mother Nature, what we want, what our consumer wants, and how do we get there with our, fairly rigid boundaries that we've drawn for ourselves in the sand, like sometimes we are willing to step over those. We're developing some beers now that, we're trying to increase the hop bitterness to the point where the beer is barely noticeable as tart. It's just, these are super fun. It's just, it's so fun to be able to know that we can lean up and push against Mother Nature without having to rely on chemicals and industry. I think it to me it's a very grounding thing.
So talk to me a little bit about how you come at this. You've now got these natural processes here. How do you idealize or envision specific beer expressions out of this? You have a generalized process. How do you go about creating, say, in more beer industry parlance, specific brands that express that in their own different ways, that create some different experiences for the people that enjoy drinking your beer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And it's something, honestly, that I think only in the last couple of years have I maybe felt comfortable with, right? I mean, for the first 6 or 7 years, we made basically one beer that had maybe different ingredients in it that would give it a little nudge this way or that way. And we needed that time, right? We needed to learn, we're still so young, and you look at brewing culture and brewing history, and you've got some breweries that have such a long pedigree and time to make their product over and over again, where they can really understand what it is. And especially with going into it without a destination, we need that time. But lately, one example is we're making a kind of similar. We have that punch, and I was telling you about we make our sour wort in. We've got a heating element in it. We're making a barrel fermented lager with cooling coils in it. So here we actually have a little draft glycol system that keeps this thing at lager temperatures. And we're actually pitching a lager yeast into it, right? These are things that 5 years ago, I'll never do that. But the cool thing is our house, then we'll bottle condition with our house culture. And so then we get to warm the beer up and add our house culture and see what happens. And so I think, to answer your question, it really comes down to those moments where we're doing something and somebody has an idea. I mean, Hans Chopin and Connor Curry are working with me in the brewery, and it's been nice to have people that are totally into what we're doing and think about these things in different ways. Hans worked with a local bakery, and we made this bread beer with their sourdough culture and their bread. And Connor's been working on our spontaneous beers. And when we have those moments where it's like, we should try this. That's especially if it's going to push it into a realm that's far enough beyond what we are doing as our typical beer. It has to come that way, right? I mean, and again, I guess this goes back to this idea that the brewer needs to be in the brew house. The brewer needs to be wearing boots. The brewer needs to be paying attention to what's going on and prodding the process. How can we do better what we're doing already? And this happens. I mean, this is I think why I appreciate what you guys are doing. It's like this is what brewers talk about. You go on a brewery tour, and it's such a simple process, right? I mean, it's like we all do the same thing, but then again, we all do different things. And I think that's, if you've got brewers that are paying attention to what you're doing, and you're really thinking about it, that's the moment that these new angles start popping up, and you can say, oh, there's no way we would have got here if we wouldn't have had those 4, 5, 6, 7 years of doing this thing basically the same way. There's no way we would have got here to this point now.
So now where you are, how, now that you have this understanding of that, of how your culture works, how you're, and have kind of learned these processes that your beer likes to move through. What are some of the, again, the ways that you've found different expressions for those beers? And, is that driven by just that curiosity about your own ingredients? Is that also driven by a desire to drink a certain type of beer? Is it, influenced by beers you taste from other brewers where, that's like, they're doing this? That's a really interesting idea. I want to figure out how to make something like that my own. What does that creative process look like for you?
I mean, it's calling it all the above. I mean, it's like relationships for me, I think are huge, right? And so, for example, where our barrel cellar is in town, we have a coffee shop. Dave Beach owns Back Porch, and he makes a point of doing single origin coffee. And because we have this relationship, he invited me to come on a coffee buying trip down to El Salvador, where I met the Menendez family, and we got to check out what they do. And at those times, it's like, holy crap, they're sun drying this cascara, right? When they're making their coffee, they're pulling this fruit off, they're sun drying, and it's like, I mean, now we use that in our Be Still, and we use it for some of our spontaneous beers. And it adds this coffee element without adding a bunch of like over the top, but it has that connection to a place. And I mean, for me personally, like all this stuff has to have, I need to be grounded, I suppose. A lot of times it starts with the relationship with the people that I'm around. Who inspires me? And it's like, well, since I've been so inspired by what you're doing, and I like all this, oh my gosh, I could use that in my beer. How would we use that? Well, gosh, we could throw that in the mash, or we could throw it in the cool ship. And, I mean, it's like these things grow. I mean, it's like, when does a muse strike? You never know.
Yeah.
But and another example is obviously, like you're saying, when you drink beer, and you really appreciate something, it's like, there's components to certain things, and you're like, how would we get that in our beer? How can I adopt some of that? I mean, it's like music, right? You hear something and it's like, how can we take a little bit of that and change it into something that's more who we are? So, I mean, I guess I don't know how to answer your question, but it's everywhere. It's like, I think one of my favorite things is when I give people a brewery tour, and if they're willing to listen to all this stuff, they could point at anything in my brew house randomly, and they just point at it and say, well, tell me about that. And, it's going to have a story. And generally it's probably going to have a person involved, and maybe, a beer. And it's like, well, this is where I came, I mean, that's why that's there.
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried to shy away from the subject and talk about brewing itself, but I feel like we can't get out of here without talking about some of the kind of broader trends in the brewing industry. And before we started the podcast, I joked a little bit because it seems like the predominant conversation on the Milk the Funk Facebook group is about how kettle sours have destroyed traditional and wood-aged sour beers, and that there's no business left in this kind of sector. You produce, and your beers tend to occupy a pretty high price point in the market. You've kind of over the last number of years for the brewery have very specifically gone for that kind of market. They're not a product for everybody. It's not mass market. They're for those people that want to seek it out and understand what it is and want to pay for that. At the same time, formats have been changing for you. The way that what distributors will actually take have been changing for you. Consumer palates have been changing. Talk to me a little bit about, from your perspective, producing this kind of beer, how, creating these things in the ways and the formats and the packages that people want them, has changed for you.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the middle of it, you know. I mean,
Sure.
right now it's interesting times. I mean, we recently, I mean, within the last year, released our beer in 375 ml packaging, and that was more of a distributor request. We had a lot of people that said they were super excited about the smaller format, but honestly, it's been very interesting. We haven't seen that be favorable to our 750 ml packaging.
Interesting.
Yeah, and some of these places that were all excited about it and ordered a bunch of 375s have actually gone back to ordering 750s. Which for me, it's great. I prefer the 750 mil. I don't think we're going to move away from the 375s.
I was just talking to Chad Jacobson at Crooked Stave yesterday about the same thing, that even though they've made a move for some of these beers into 375s, they haven't been selling. They actually don't sell as well, in terms of net revenue, as 750s. So as much as people think that is a trend, and is changing the industry, it doesn't seem to actually be reflecting in sales to that same kind of degree.
Yeah, and for us, it may have something to do with the fact of our brand and our price point. That regardless, it's going to take someone that's willing to make that decision. We are, one thing I will say, which I'm very proud to say, which some people have told me not to tell anybody, but I mean, we're actually lowering our prices this year. And it's when you go from 125 barrels sales volume to 250, we're doubling, and it's not very much, but it's worked out for us to the point where
you produce 250 barrels of beer a year.
We produce a little more than that. We sell about 225 to 250. But with our tasting room and being able to sell retail, for the first 8 years, I just sold wholesale distribution.
Right.
Tasting room's helping with that. But anyway, it's been this more, because the comment you made about our price point is, from the beginning, has always been a struggle for me. It's I went into this very intentional with trying to show how difficult running a small business could be. And not needing to sell a bunch of beer. It was this is going to be the price, and it's going to just get more expensive the further away you get from the brewery, which should be reality. And it's not, it's not. And especially when you're in competition with other brands and breweries that produce more. But when I told myself, when I got to the point where we could reduce prices, that we're going to do it. And, I think last year we were looking at, our high end were like $32 to $35 bottles. I'm hoping that we don't have to break the $30 price point anymore. And this is different than the wine, and this is the whole thing. I think when I got into this, I thought that, we were going to trend like wine, right? I mean, the idea of a boutique or a high-end product and the appreciation for that we would trend like wine. And, beer has always had this component of being closer to, let's say, real people, common people. And so for us who are brewing this beer that takes a lot of time and energy, what can we do to make that more accessible? We can buy a cork or cager machine. We can employ people who are dedicated to helping me figure out how to make this get to market in a more efficient manner. But I'm super stoked about this, and because there's one thing, the two things that people when over the last 5 or 6 years, if they hear the Yellow Apothecary, it's generally oh, it's expensive and I can't get it, right? And if you're running a business, those two things aren't probably the best. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And in reality, those two things are probably fairly accurate, but at the same time, they're not totally accurate. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we, this is kind of like going back to what I was talking to you before, how do we, without a sales and marketing budget, how do we communicate to people, and I've got this little blog, we do some Instagramming, but in this busy industry we're in, how do you get your point across, and how do you tell people who you are and what you want? And for us, it's looking more and more like, we have this ale club, we have a membership club, which has been instrumental to who we are, and they are our sales and marketing team. And I'm super fortunate, and I feel honored that we have these people coming back year after year to help support who we are and what we're doing. Because we don't need to, not need to, but we're not forced to go make commodity beer, and that's the angle we're taking. And
so what does success look like for you and for Ale Apothecary?
Well, I feel like we're in it right now. I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. I have no desire, like, never is, it's this word that I probably shouldn't use, but I'm committed to keeping the brew house where it is. I mean, we're about the place. We're about this product and this process that we've created. And I'm just hopeful that, so I guess, yes, to specifically answer your question, success for me is to involve more people into kind of the idea that art and culture and history are important, and that as odd as it sounds, right, as in this alcoholic consumer partying culture, we are the stewards of that. And the more that I hear that brewers are interested in making that important, that's success. I mean, the fact that we have people that are interested in our beer because of that's success. We're paying our people. We're getting by. I don't have any big dreams of selling. I mean, well, there's no way that anybody in their right mind would buy this company, but I'm stoked on what we have going on, and I'm happy with where we're at.
If people want to learn more about Ale Apothecary, the Ale Apothecary, where do they find you?
The blog is mountainbrewery.org. Our website is thealeapothecary.com, which is going to be undergoing some renovations here soon. It's been a landing page, splash page for years, but we're going to start. In Oregon, we're allowed to ship directly to consumers in Oregon, and we're going to start making that available in this new website. Tavour is a good representative of us. You can get help. Sure. Yeah.
I've noticed your bottles popping up every once in a while. Not a whole lot, but yeah.
And then Instagram, we've got the Ale Apothecary on Instagram, and that's kind of got our big picture stuff.
Yeah. Well, cheers. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Old Orchard supplies craft juice blends from the heart of Beer City, USA. SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. And Second Kitchen connects local breweries and iconic neighborhood restaurants to keep customers in your taproom longer. If you've enjoyed this conversation, like the one I just had with Paul, I hope you go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Paul, thanks for joining me here on the podcast.
Thanks, Jamie. This
is
great.
It's been a fun conversation, and I think I really appreciate your unique approach, creative approach, and grounded approach to making beer.
No, I appreciate your interest in keeping this thing going, man. Thank you.
Cool. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.